my time on the Juneau Icefield. And so I was a faculty member, basically responsible for teaching, with the Juneau Icefield Research Program, and I will call it JERP from now on because it's a lot easier to say. And so this is one of the longest running, if not the longest running, polar expedition research programs that has an educational component to it. When I was on a few years ago, it was the 75th anniversary, so they're going on 78, 79 years now. And it serves two purposes. We bring a whole bunch of students on, and we're there to teach them about glacial geology, glacial biology, et cetera, et cetera. And there's also 7 to 8 faculty from universities all over the world who are there to not only teach, but to conduct research at the same time. And as you can see, glacial gear has evolved quite a bit. I can't imagine what their feet must have been like wearing leather boots and cotton socks. We were told from the beginning to not wear any cotton whatsoever. And so, yeah, long, rich history. These are the trailblazers who sort of started the path through the Icefield, built the, if you want to call them buildings, they're some form of building that we'll talk more about, that I'll introduce you to. But it's a really, really cool program. And so what the expedition actually is down in southeast Alaska. So this is the main part of Alaska. The islands that stretch over to Russia go this way. And then we are down here. This little white patch is the Juneau Icefield. And then the capital of Alaska, Juneau, is situated in that sound. And so zooming in on this red box right here is a satellite view of the Juneau Icefield. And within the Juneau Icefield, there's a whole bunch of different glaciers. Has anyone been on an Alaskan cruise? Awesome. Did you go to a glacier? Which one? Oh, in New Zealand. Oh, okay. Well, if you go on an Alaskan cruise, you're probably going to Juneau at some point, and the main one that is accessible from the city is Mendenhall Glacier. And so Mendenhall Glacier is right about here, so it's getting pretty close to the city. And so we started out in Juneau, all the way down here, and this blue line is basically our path up through British Columbia, where we finish up in Atlin. And there's a whole bunch of camps along the way. And so it's about a 75-mile traverse, which is 120 kilometers. And we had about 30 students, 15 staff, and 10 faculty. So the faculty there to teach, do research, and then most importantly were the staff members, because those were the ones who were responsible for making sure that we did not fall in a crevasse. Because this was my first time on skis and a glacier, so that was a strong possibility to happen. Okay, so just a quick bit about preparation. I've never spent so much time in REI. I don't know if you guys have REI in the UK. REI is basically our big outdoor store, and I was there basically once a week asking them questions about what is this piece of equipment? I have no idea what this is. I need it. And they would help me out. And the leaders of JERP actually gave us a workout manual where it says, go to your local hill, like the steepest hill you have in your backyard, and get a backpack, put all your books in it, and just walk up and down over and over again. So we're doing lots of that. And so this is all the gear that was required in the Bible that they gave us of equipment, and it all had to fit into here and into here. So that was a lesson in bag Tetris. All right, so now we're up in Juneau, and we don't get flown up, we have to hike up, because helicopters are very expensive. So we have to lug all of our gear up to that first camp. And if you've ever seen a topographic map, this is the path that we followed in red. So we're climbing up, this is Lemon Creek Glacier. The first camp is right here on this ridge. So if you've never seen a topographic map, these are topographic lines, topo lines. Which are basically indicative of elevation. And when those topo lines are really, really close together, it basically means it's incredibly steep. And this was probably the steepest terrain that I've ever encountered. We had 5,000 feet of elevation gain in only 8 miles of hiking. And we had about 30 pounds on our backs because we had to bring all of our gear with us. The only thing that got flown up was skis and ski boots. But once we got up on the ridge, this is Black Ruby Ridge, it was quite gorgeous because there was steep drop-offs on both sides that we could look down into. So that first day was probably the most physically challenging day of the entire trip. All right, so we get to Camp 17. So we are just getting on the Icefield here at Camp 17, right on the Lemon Creek Glacier. And this is basically the safety camp. So not a lot of research, not a lot of teaching going on at this point. And life at Camp 17 was a bit tough, mainly because you're so close to the edge of the mountains. The weather was really unpredictable. The clouds could roll in at any point. You basically, what we say, you get socked in, or you're living in a ping pong ball because everything is just white all around you. That's what it looked like most of the time. So these are the very driven students doing their outhouse duty, cleaning out all the outhouses, in what looks to be very, very windy weather, very windy, wet weather. But then when it was very nice weather, we had some fantastic sunsets over the Coast Ranges in Alaska. And so on the rare occasion that did happen, everyone was outside enjoying that. And it was very cozy. So these are what our buildings look like. Again, they were not built by engineers, they were built by scientists who wanted to go work on the ice field in the 1950s. And they haven't really been updated since. We replaced the floor every now and then, but that's about it. So they basically look like tin cans. And at Camp 17 was by far the most cramped, which was kind of nice because you got the worst camp over with first and you didn't know what your expectations were in the later camps. And it was so cramped that our cook shack doubled as the lecture hall. So we'd eat dinner and then we would sort of cook and do a lecture in that same building. So, like I mentioned, Camp 17 was all about safety training because in order to conduct research on a glacier, you kind of need to know how to traverse and navigate a glacier. It's a very, very dangerous environment. And so some of the most important navigational skills are learning how to traverse a glacier on a rope team. So it might be a little difficult to see, but there's a rope right here that's connecting all of these people together, and it sort of hooks up into a carabiner on your belt. And you always have to have a ice axe in one hand. And so that's what this person's carrying right here is an ice axe. Because if you do slip, I mean, this is pretty steep. You're going to slide because you're on, pretty frozen snow. And so that ice axe, you then just sort of stick it to the ground and you self-arrest yourself. So you're always sort of hiking with one ski pole to kind of help you just move. And then you also have the ice axe in the other hand in case you fall and you jam it into the ground. The other important thing that we did at Camp 17 was learn how to build pulley systems. So a pulley system is essentially using ropes and really complicated knots. I had a really hard time understanding how to do it. This is why the safety staff were there, because I probably would not trust myself to sell it the pulley system. It was very, very difficult and lots of difficult knots. So what I was good at was pretending to have fallen in a crevasse, and I just got to lie there. And so I had a pretty important job, if I do say so myself. So if there were to be a situation where we needed a pulley system in the field, hopefully I'm the one who fell in the crevasse, which is a strong possibility. Okay, so downtime at Camp 17. So we generally had downtime like after dinner. And so that was the time when, if it was nice out at the Lemon Creek Glacier, all the really hardcore skiers would go out and ski down the Ptarmigan Glacier, and they would call it Nar the Ptarmigan, is what all the ski bums would say. We had a lot of ski bums on this trip who were expert skiers, while the other half of us were learning how to pizza slice down the slope or whatever you call it. That was me. So yeah, it was gorgeous. And other ways to pass the time, reading books. The Kindle was the best thing I ever bought because it was really light and it didn't really add much weight to my pack. And learning how to play, The card game where you move the peg around the board. Cribbage. Yes, that's where I learned up. I played so much cribbage on this trip. So much cribbage. My mom would be very upset that I forgot that name. Okay, so that's Camp 17. That's the bulk of Camp 17. So what are we doing next? We are making our way to Camp 10, higher up the Icefield. And so that journey is 23 miles or 37 kilometers. And now we are cross-country skiing. We're always on skis. You're always on skis on a glacier. Because if you're on your feet and you do hit a crevasse, there's a lot more weight in that single point that could push you through a snow bridge. When you're on skis, your weight is more widely distributed, so that you're less likely to fall into a narrow crevasse. So we're cross-country skiing, and we can't do, maybe some of them could, but I know I sure as heck couldn't do 37 kilometers in a single day. And so we do a overnight camp, field camp, that we call the Norris Cache. There's a big ice fall there, which is basically where a glacier is quite literally flowing over a steep slope, just like a waterfall. And so, a bit about the traverse. This is what it looked like. The person we would go in rows of two. The people who had the toughest job were the ones in front, because they're the ones that are sort of packing down the snow for the first time, and everybody behind them gets to ride in their freshly painted or freshly carved roads. So we kind of took turns going in front to pave that way. But yeah, like I mentioned, it was really monotonous. You're just kind of going like this for hours on end, and if the weather was bad, you're in a ping pong ball. It kind of doesn't feel like you're going anywhere, unless you look at the GPS. So it was a bit, you always want to have an earbud in, essentially, or else it gets very boring, because no one's talking, because everyone's tired, because you got that big pack on your back. Some occasions it did get a little interesting. We had to climb up hills, get over a ridge. Climbing up a hill with skis on with a heavy pack, I fell backwards many times. And then this was that camp that was set up. And so the safety staff had it good. They had snowmobiles, so they got to go out ahead of us, set up the camp so that it was ready to go when we got there. And this is the cook shack in here in this big green tent. And we had mac and cheese and chili that night. And it was the best mac and cheese chili I've ever had. And we also got Snicker bars, which was pretty awesome. Because I don't know if that's slide on food, but the food is basically canned food from Costco. And so there was no desserts, nothing like that. But on the traverse days, they don't want people to what they call bonk, which is just simply where you run out of energy, you can't move anymore. And it happens quite a bit. They give you each get like 3 Snickers bars, because it's the most densely caloric way to get food in you and energy in you. So that was fun. What was not fun was blistered feet. The students who rented boots and they weren't fitted to them had some of the gnarliest blisters I've ever seen. I'm talking like eye patch size blisters. So they did not have a good time, especially on the second day of the traverse. But we all got there. We all got to Camp 10. Again, we're in the middle of the ice field here. And this is where the science began. And so a lot of the science was being done on Taku Glacier, which is actually the world's thickest alpine glacier. So alpine glaciers we talked about last lecture are the ones that are up in the mountains. They're flowing down slope. They're carving out those U-shaped valleys. And Camp 10 was right about here, one of these, what we call a nunatak. And so at its thickest point, Taku is 1.5 kilometers thick, probably about in here. So 1.5 kilometer thick ice sheet moving down this mountain. You can imagine the amount of erosion that's happening, carving out of this mountain. Okay, so life at Camp 10. Camp 10 felt like a Ritz-Carlton after 2 weeks at Camp 17. It was very spacious. This was the cook shack. The cook shack had a patio with umbrellas, which was very nice. And those umbrellas were very much needed because the sun is incredibly strong when you're up on the ice field. This is a view of the cook shack. So, pretty well equipped. The way kitchen worked was students were responsible for all the cooking, and they would get up at 5 a.m. They get groups of 3 assigned to them the night before. They get up at 5 a.m. The most important job of the day is to make sure that there's hot coffee ready for when everyone wakes up, and then they do breakfast. They would do lunch if people were in camp. If people were out of camp, there wouldn't be a lunch because we'd all have field lunches, and then they would do dinner. And yeah, it was just very spacious. Everyone was happy because we weren't sitting on top of each other. And there was also twice the amount of outhouses. So these are the outhouses. And this was my personal favorite outhouse. I enjoyed spending time here because you had a fantastic view of the Taku Towers off in the distance. And so we're looking basically across Taku Glacier right here. The glacier is flowing from right to left in this direction. Okay, so we did some exploring at Camp 10, learning how to, do new cool things on the ice, such as ice wall climbing. So that's sort of a small wall of the glacier that's exposed. So this is snow, that's sort of bare ice of the glacier. So where it was exposed, we could climb up with crampons, those spikes that you put on your boots, and then use your ice axe, and you can kind of climb up like your Spider-Man, which was pretty fun. Lots of skiing, so people who weren't already expert skiers were starting to get a little more comfortable on skis, and so at that point I didn't go up here. Well, I went up here to take a photo, but I was skiing down like this slope, and I was doing the widest turns you've probably ever seen, but I got down, and that's all that mattered. And then also exploring these glacial lakes, and what was fun, in addition to just the beauty of them, and drinking what's probably the freshest, cleanest water on the surface of the planet, we did croc races. So when you weren't wearing ski boots on the ice field, everybody was wearing Crocs. And Crocs are the greatest footwear known to mankind, the most adaptable footwear known to mankind. And so we would bring our Crocs and we would throw on the lake, and we would see whose winds flowing down this lake. And so that was a lot of fun. Getting around. So what we're doing on this video, there's an orange box right here. Sorry. Yep, that's me with facial hair. We don't need to see that. Is this going to replay itself? Yeah, so it's a little orange box at my feet. That's a ground penetrating radar, and it's essentially imaging the internal structure of the glacier. And then this is how, if we wanted to go collect data at a location on the ice field that was far from the camp, we didn't want everybody to ski out there because then you're going to be gassed by the time you do get there. And so we would do tow systems. So this would carry everyone's backpacks, the science gear, and then we'd set a rope up, and everybody would get towed. And I believe this student might fall. Yep. And then I stopped the video because I had to help them. But the towing helped us essentially get around quick around the ice field. But it was almost like water skiing. If you've ever gone water skiing, the same sort of like muscular endurance that I didn't have, and it was actually pretty hard. Okay, so at Camp 10 is where we had our first helicopter delivery. And so this is by far the most dangerous part of JERP. So much so that we were basically all banned to our respective cabins. And so I snuck out of my cabin here to go take this shot, because essentially the way we got food up on the ice field was via helicopter. And the helicopter would have mostly canned goods, pasta, rice, things that don't spoil, but then we would have what we call freshies, and the freshies were probably 2 days worth of tomatoes and onions, but those 2 days were glorious. I kind of have to tell myself to remember that appreciation when I'm on a cruise and all of that stuff is readily available. And so all of that food would be packed into these sacks that are then sort of just dangling from this helicopter. So the helicopter is flying up on the ice field from Juneau with all this gear packed. And then once it was safe, once the helicopters landed, we detached the sacks. Everybody would line up, and we would just do the sort of buddy system of getting all this food all the way down to the cook shack. And it literally was like a train of like 45 people to get all that food in there. So it was quite the process, took a few hours, but very important. Okay, so what kind of science were we doing up at Camp 10? There was a whole lot of science going on because there's faculty with different expertise. What I was doing specifically was measuring albedo. And albedo is essentially how much light is reflecting from the surface. And so I'm using this instrument here called an albedometer. And so it has, this is jargony, and I apologize, it has two pyranometers. A pyranometer measures how much light is incident on a surface, is hitting a surface. And so there's one that's facing downwards and one that's facing upwards. So how much light is incoming from the sun, and then how much light is getting reflected by the surface. And that's how you get your albedo. And the reason that albedo is important is if you have if a really high albedo, like greater than 90%, then a lot of that light is getting reflected. So if it's getting reflected, then it's not getting absorbed. So when you stand out in the sun and there's a lot of light hitting you, like when you're in Bergen getting sunburned, like I did, that's a lot of heat. And so if you have a glacial surface with a low albedo, all that sunlight is getting absorbed in its warmth and its energy, and that accelerates melting. And so we were measuring albedo across the glacier to see how that albedo changed with elevation. And students learned about albedo in unfortunate ways. When you're on a traverse, we had a student who didn't wear a neck gaiter over their mouth, and they were mouth breathing. And does anybody want to guess what happened to the roof of their mouth? It burned. Yeah, because they were mouth breathing and the sunlight was reflecting off of the glacier onto the roof of their mouth. And so also had the gnarliest scab on their lip, sunburn on their lip. They couldn't eat for days. It was very unfortunate. So they learned albedo the hard way. And the other bit of science that we were doing up in the Icefield was measuring the velocity of the glacier. How quick was this 1.5 kilometer thick glacier actually moving? And so the way we did this was by installing these stakes, these very, very complex, high-tech stakes that were just simply a wooden stake with a trash bag attached to it so that we didn't lose sight of it. And we drilled these stakes into the ground across the glacier. So that's Camp 10 right here. This is the Nunatak that the camp is built on. And so at every arrow that you see on this map, there was one of these stakes installed. So it's stretched out across the glacier. And we would use very, very fancy high-resolution GPS, just like the GPS on your phone. The GPS on your phone is accurate to about 5 meters. This GPS is accurate to about 1 centimeter. So really, really fine, precise location. And we put out these stakes day 1 at Camp 10, and then we were at Camp 10 for about 2 weeks. So at the end of those 2 weeks, we went out and we measured their location again, and that shows us how did this stake move over those 2 weeks. So from that, you can derive a velocity because you have distance over time. And so looking at this map right here, we have this stretched color bar from this white to dark red. So where do we think the fastest velocities are on Taku? The middle. Yeah, exactly. The middle of Taku was moving about 75 centimeters a day. So that's a lot of ice moving very, very quickly. And you can see as you get further and further away from the central axis of the glacier, it gets a little whiter in color. And that's because that part of the ice is experiencing drag from the mountain walls. So that part of the ice is not moving as fast. So that was a really interesting project, at least in my opinion, my unbiased opinion. Another cool thing we did at Camp 10 was we did a remote field camp to sort of simulate what it's like to work in more remote polar environments, such as the Arctic, where you don't have your nice fancy aluminum shacks, you have a tent. And so we did that for, I think, 3 nights, where we just sort of skied out into the middle of Echo Glacier and said, all right, let's build camp here. And I'm like, okay, how do we do that? And it was a lot of fun. It was with a smaller group of people. This was our kitchen table that we just sort of dug into the glacial surface. So we played, you can see that sort of the lid of a plastic container here. We were playing dice, playing cards, and you're just sitting in the middle of this awesome glacier. It was really surreal. And then that was the first time we saw green in about 4 weeks. So I was very excited to see trees, even though they were very, very, very far away. What does that look like? What letter does that look like? A U. What do we think it is? Yeah, U-shaped valley. Yeah. So there was a big old glacier that went through here that is now long since gone. And the U-shaped valley that's going to be present where Taku currently is going to be even deeper than this one. Okay, so now we are nearing the end. We are going up to Camp 18, which is known as the High Ice. And we did this traverse in a day. It took about 12 hours. And Camp 18 was by far the most stunning of the camps. It had adequate amounts of buildings and space, and it was built on top of this nunatak that overlooks the Gilkey Trench. And so the Gilkey Trench had glaciers that were once up to here, but as we entered the interglacial stage, they have since then been lowering and retreating over time, leaving behind this awe-inspiring valley, but the glaciers are noticeably, and I saw photos from the camp this year, and these glaciers, this Gilkey Trench, these glaciers flowing down in this direction, are even noticeably skinnier than they were when this photo was taken. But yeah, Camp 18 was fantastic. Really good weather because we're far enough away from Juneau and where the storms usually get up to. So much so that a lot of us actually slept outside. We slept outside on the nunatak, and it was a great way to get away from snoring, which was basically a near impossible task when you had 10 people in one cabin. So a bit more just about general Icefield life. How do we get water? Water is super important. We got water by melting snow. So we would set up this tarp and shovel a bunch of snow onto it. And the weather on the Icefield is incredibly warm during the day. It's a temperate environment. So in the really cold winters and then really warm summers. And so when the sun was out, this snow would melt pretty quick. A lot of the times we wanted to wear shorts when we were out in the field because it was 75 degrees, but they wouldn't let us because if you fell, you were scratching yourself. So that snow would melt and it would go through what literally is a spare gutter from one of the buildings. And that water would then flow down into what I believed and told myself to believe was a clean garbage bin. I didn't die, most importantly, so it did the job. And that was part of the morning duty that nobody was excused from. So even faculty had to do one of the morning duties. I cleaned outhouses, I shoveled snow onto the tarp. Everybody did their part. Living on an ice field is all about everybody working together as a team. And if that doesn't happen, nothing's gonna get done. And then in the cook shack, I love this photo. It's always tang o'clock on the ice field. Have you guys ever had tang? Might be an American thing. Is there an orange juice equivalent that comes in a powder form? Sunny Delight, yes, Sunny Delight, Sunny D. Yeah, so tang was always brought up on the ice field since the whenever it started, the 1950s, because it was the main source of vitamin C. Quite literally to prevent scurvy like you would get on a long expedition because you couldn't keep fresh veggies and fruits. So we had tang, and tang, I enjoyed a nice glass of hot tang every night because it was the only sweet thing that was available after eating pasta for the umpteenth time. Have I had tang since? Absolutely not. Okay, so up at Camp 18 on July 25th, so last week, everyone celebrated it up on the ice field, is Jertmas. So Jertmas is great if you're really creative and very stressful if you're not creative, because you would draw someone's name and you were responsible for making them a gift that was made from something undesirable that was found in camp. So as a way of reusing something that otherwise would have been sent into the burn pile. So there were some very, very creative gifts. One student made a cribbage board with the Juneau Icefield map that he glued on it, and I was like, I would take that, but that wasn't my gift, unfortunately. Fortunately, my gift was a beer that one of the other faculty members attempted to ferment using yeast that was used to make bread, tea, some type of berry, and water. And it had alcohol. I'd say it was probably about 3% because I drank very cautiously just to make sure I didn't go blind. I drank about a cup of it, and after over a month of not drinking alcohol, it went right to my head. So I said thank you very much to that faculty member. I am not creative, and so I made, as the geologist on board, I got a fragment of rock from the Nunatak, which was a granodiorite that had a fancy name to it, and I made a nice little card that was outlined in blue, or outlined in green and red for Christmas, and I said what type of rock it was, where it was found, the GPS location, and I got some wire and attached the rock to it. So that was about as much as I could do, was create an ornament, but at least it was Christmassy. Okay, so what were we doing for science at Camp 18? We were creating 3D models of the Von Lewis icefall. So this is what an icefall looks like. And like I mentioned at the Norris, this was a much, much, much bigger icefall. This is where you have an alpine glacier that's flowing down, and suddenly it sort of flows off of a steep escarpment. It's not, that slope doesn't just continue. It's flowing down, and finally it just crashes off because of that really steep cliff. And so that's what that looks like here. And we would be sitting up on this Nunatak. Camp is right over here. So we're overlooking this icefall, and you're just sitting there, and every 5 minutes you'll hear this big thundering sound because a big chunk of ice had just broken off of the icefall and flowed down and collapsed down into the Gilkey Trench. And so we were flying drones to capture really high resolution photos of this icefall to create 3D models for looking at stress and deformation rates. Okay, so exploring at Camp 18. So we were doing more than just science and making really bad Christmas gifts. At this point, everybody's really comfortable, and so these were sort of the best sort of adventures that we were doing because people had their navigational skills down pat. And my favorite, two favorites were summiting Mount Ogilvie. So person for scale right here. This is a day trip. We hiked all the way up to this summit, and you may not believe me, but I got down that slope. So about 5 weeks after never having skied before, I was carving very wide turns to get down that slope. Which is probably one of the most holy crap, I did it moments of my life. Probably couldn't do it now because it's been a few years. Another really cool thing was rappelling down into a crevasse. That was a really cool experience, just to sort of appreciate the power of glacial flow and all the deformation that it does. Okay, so we are wrapping up. We are getting off the Icefield. And so a lot of students, they skied off the Icefield. They skied back down to Juneau because you're going from an area of high elevation to low elevation. So it was a nice ski because your gravity is working in your favor this time. Those who wanted to stay back at Camp 18 and clean up, the cleanup is intense because you have to clean it up for basically bunkering down for the winter, and nobody comes back until the next year. So lots of cleaning, but those who cleaned, us folks right here, we got to take a helicopter ride down while everybody else skied. And so that was I compare it to the Jurassic Park scene, the dun, 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 as we flew down the Gilkey Trench. That big valley that was beneath Camp 18 that I just showed, we basically followed the Gilkey Trench down to Juneau. And let me tell you, when we went into a grocery store about an hour after landing, it was like Remember the show Supermarket Sweep in the 1990s? You guys had that? Okay, cool. Yeah, that was basically me. Buying all the most colorful things I could find. If it had color, I got it. And then Oreos. Those were the must-haves. Okay, so that's the end of my journey. This was a pre-photo before we went up to day one, up to the safety camp, and then this was near the end after 6 weeks of no showering, which once you get past the first week is not that bad. Okay, it's not that bad. Everyone can do it. But yeah, returned home to Southern California, a little more rugged, filled with Tang and peanut butter, and a lifetime of memories. So hope you guys enjoyed that story. Thanks for coming. And I'll hang out down here again if you guys